Okay, this is the original box for Wing Commander. So I bought this game in 1990 when it first came out. It even says a special promotional release. I don't have the disc for this or the manual or anything. I just have the box. I just found it in my garage somewhere. This thing is pretty old. This thing is almost like how many years old? Let's see. More than 30 years old. "29 years old. Yeah, this game was pretty fun when it first came out. I had a 386SX 16 megahertz computer when I got this game, and you see the box art, the front side of the box art. You never saw a laser like this in the game. In the actual game, lasers were just spheres or like balls. But everything else was pretty accurate in terms of how the game looked on a PC with a VGA graphics adapter. So I had a VGA graphics adapter in my computer, and it pretty much looked like this. Everything. The game ran pretty smoothly on my computer. I saw the Amiga versions, like the Amiga people playing Wing Commander on the Amiga 500. It looks pretty sluggish. I never had an Amiga 500, but I looked it up on YouTube and saw some of the people playing Wing Commander on Amiga 500, and it was a lot worse than it was compared to what it was on the PC, on a 386 or even a 286. Because a lot of my friends back then had 286 based computers with EGA graphics back in the day. So a lot of my friends had only that, or some of them even had less than that. They probably had like a IBM XT 4 megahertz, I'm sorry, with CGA graphics. And a lot of people had those old XTs also. They were called 8088 or 8086, and then after that it was 80286. That's a 286, and I think that the band width was anywhere from 8 megahertz to 12 megahertz, and then you had the 386 series. The DX came out first. I think it was like 25 megahertz, 33 megahertz for a 3D6 DX, and then after that they came out with a 3D6 SX, which was a lesser version of a 3D6 DX. It was slower than that, so they came out with the 3D6 SX 16 megahertz first, and then they came out with a 20 megahertz 3D6 SX and the 25 megahertz. I think they had up to a 33 megahertz 3D6 SX. That was the highest it went. and it was all on a 16-bit bus, basically. And yeah, this game was it was good on my computer. It ran perfectly, and here you see the system requirements for the game. It says IBM PC or 100% compatible system, required 640 kilobytes of memory, dual floppies or hard drive, recommended 12 megahertz or higher, joystick or mouse. Mouse was probably the best way to play this game. I never played it on joystick because I didn't have a joystick on my computer. I only had a mouse and a keyboard. And it says graphics 256 VGA MCGA, EGA, that's 16 color. Tandy had some kind of EGA, but it was like different. It wasn't like standard EGA. Music, sound effects, optional. Roland was like the best sound card out there. Sound synthesizer. I think it cost almost like $200-300 back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But the sound was phenomenal for it. And Ad-Lib, that's what I had. And Sound Blaster or 100% compatible soundboard. Sound Blaster, never had that. It was from Creative Labs, and eventually became the standard graphics card for the PC gaming industry after Ad-Lib went into bankruptcy because they couldn't compete with Creative Labs Sound Blaster sound card, because the Sound Blaster could not only play synthesized music, it also had voice. So that's something Ad-Lib did not have. So let's see, it's just $9 exchange form and close for other disc formats. So this game came with 3.5-inch 1.44 megabyte high density floppy disks. So on my computer I had a 5.25 1.22 megabytes high density floppy drive, and also a 3.5-inch 1.44 megabyte high density floppy drive, as well as a 40 megabyte hard drive. I think the hard drive was like a Maxter or something. I don't know if that company exists anymore. All I see these days for hard drives is Seagate and Western Digital. So I don't see Maxter anymore. So I had a hard drive, so I installed this computer on my hard drive. So the game loaded pretty quickly. You know, it'd be like equivalent to someone having an SSD today. They would be able to load their computer up very quickly or start it up quickly. So this was at a time when people were using floppy disks to play games. You know, they would swap floppy disks. So some games like Ultima, let's say 4 or 3, they had like 8 floppy disks. So you had to swap floppy disks to play the game, which was quite annoying. It's better to just have a hard drive. But hard drives were quite expensive back in the 80s and early 90s. And they started to become very affordable maybe around the early 1990s, you know. So that was one of the reasons why computers were expensive back in the day, was because of the components. They cost a lot, you know. Even a floppy disk drive, a high density floppy disk drive back in 88 would cost you about maybe anywhere from $200 to $300, and a hard drive would be 20 megabytes or so. Could cost anywhere from maybe $600 to $800. I don't know. It was a lot of money. And RAM was expensive. CPUs, everything. Every component of a computer was pretty expensive back then. So yeah, this game was created by Origin, and they created a lot of good games back in the 80s and 90s. Games like the Ultima series, which was a very popular role-playing game. It was kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons type of role-playing game in a fantasy world setting. That was very popular in the 1980s. Stuff like D&D. We would play D&D in elementary school and junior high school and stuff like that back in the 80s. And yeah, pretty much as for games back in those days, they would always show the box art, but it didn't reflect it wasn't the box art of the game that you were purchasing for. For example, let's say you got Wing Commander for the Amiga or something. It wouldn't, the graphics wouldn't look like this. Or if you, I don't know if they had Wing Commander for this Commodore 64. Let me check it out right now. I'm not really sure. They never had it. No, they never had a Wing Commander for the Commodore 64. It was only available in 16-bit computers and video game consoles. And yeah, I played this game also on the Super Nintendo. I went to Blockbuster and rented it back in, I think I had a Super Nintendo back in 1992 or something. Yeah, I rented it. It wasn't as good as the PC version, because the PC version had the PC in general had a better float point, computational or abilities, you know, like computing numbers with decimals. That's what a float point computation is. So you have integer computations, which involve whole numbers with, let's say, a number from 1. Let's say 1 is a whole number. That's an integer computation. Let's say 100 is a whole number, and say a million, a billion, without any decimals is a whole number. So it's better in, so the RISC type of processor are better in computing those things, like integer calculations, whole numbers, but not float point. That required a lot more computational power, you know. And Intel just had a monopoly on that. They always produced processors which had better FPU than AMD and later Cyrex. So that's how it was like, basically. And as for this game, it was a pretty difficult game, Wing Commander, and I found out how to cheat on it because my friends would read like PC gaming magazines, or they'd get the information from their friends who read PC gaming magazines, and told me about different cheats you could use for this game. Like you put in some kind of code when you type in the command to start Wing Commander, and then all you would do is press the keys alternate, delete, and you could destroy enemy fighters. And that was a way of cheating. That was kind of like hacking into the game and cheating. So yeah, the game developers for this put that in there. They always put in little quirks like that, you know, so you could cheat. It's funny. It's pretty fun. So anyways, thanks for watching.